Can love mend a broken soul even when the odds seem impossible? Picture a story where two hearts, worlds apart, collide in a dance of pain, hope, and redemption. This is the tale of Sarah Bennett and James Dalton, a journey that begins in the quiet fields of a small American town and the shadowed halls of a New York mansion. Their lives, marked by loss and longing, intertwine in ways neither could have imagined, proving that sometimes love finds us when we least expect it. Let's start in Willow Creek, a sleepy town nestled in the heart of rural America. Golden cornfields stretch under wide blue skies, and the air hums with the rhythm of crickets at dusk. Here, Sarah Bennett grew up, a young woman with dreams as vast as the horizon, but a life confined by circumstance. Sarah is mute, her voice stolen by a childhood trauma she rarely speaks of, even in the silent language of her hands. In Willow Creek, where everyone knows your name, her silence makes her an outsider, yet Sarah's heart is anything but quiet. Her eyes sparkle with kindness, and her smile carries a stubborn hope that things will get better. She helps her neighbors tend gardens, mends clothes for extra cash, and dreams of a day when she can leave poverty behind. But her family, struggling to make ends meet, leans heavily on her, and Sarah feels the weight of their needs pressing down. Now travel hundreds of miles to New York City, where skyscrapers pierce the clouds and the pulse of ambition never slows. In a sprawling mansion on the Upper East Side, James Dalton lives in a world of wealth but not of warmth. Once a charismatic CEO, James commanded boardrooms with a sharp mind and a brighter smile. That was before the accident, a car crash that stole his ability to walk and the life of his best friend David Lawson. The guilt of surviving when David didn't haunts James like a shadow. He's diagnosed with survivor syndrome, a psychological scar that traps him in a cycle of self-blame. For years, he's locked himself in a darkened room, his wheelchair a constant reminder of what he's lost. The world outside moves on, but James remains frozen, refusing visitors, ignoring his family's pleas, and pushing away anyone who dares to care. These two souls, Sarah and James, seem destined to never meet. One is tethered to a rural life of simplicity and struggle, the other to a gilded cage of grief and isolation. Sarah's days are filled with the hum of manual labor, her hands rough from work, her heart soft with dreams. James's days are empty, his wealth meaningless, his spirit crushed under the weight of a tragedy he can't escape. Yet fate, or perhaps something more human, has other plans. In Willow Creek, Sarah's cousin, Travis Bennett, sees an opportunity. He's a man with a silver tongue and a heart driven by greed. When he hears of a wealthy family in New York seeking help for their troubled heir, Travis hatches a plan. He promises Sarah a job in the city, a chance to earn enough to lift her family out of debt. It's a lie, of course. The job is a marriage contract. A deal struck with Walter Dalton, James's grandfather, who believes a kind-hearted companion might pull his grandson from the abyss. Walter is no saint. A shrewd businessman, he's built the Dalton empire with cunning and resolve, but beneath his tough exterior lies a grandfather's love. He's watched James waste away, his once vibrant spirit dimmed by guilt. Desperate, Walter agrees to pay Travis $500,000, 0 cents, not to buy a bride, but to secure a legal arrangement he hopes will save his grandson. The contract is framed as a job for Sarah, a living caregiver role, but the fine print binds her to James in marriage. In America, such agreements require legal documentation, and Travis ensures Sarah signs without understanding, exploiting her trust and her muteness. She boards a bus to New York, her heart pounding with hope for a new beginning. Unaware of the deception awaiting her, James, meanwhile, knows nothing of this plan. His world is a prison of his own making where memories of David's laughter and the screech of tires replay endlessly. He's unaware that his grandfather has orchestrated a collision of lives, one that will force him to confront his pain. Sarah, with her quiet strength and unyielding goodness, is about to step into his darkness, and James, with his buried warmth and broken dreams, will soon face a choice, to push her away or let her light in. What happens when a woman who cannot speak meets a man who will not listen? How do two people, scarred by their pasts, find a way to heal? This story is about more than love. It's about courage, forgiveness, and the power of human connection to mend what seems irreparable. As we dive into the lives of Sarah and James, ask yourself, what would you do if love asked you to risk everything? Stay with us as we unravel a tale of heartache and hope, where two unlikely hearts discover that sometimes the greatest miracles come from the simplest acts of kindness. Sarah Bennett stepped off the bus in New York City, her small suitcase clutched tightly in her hands. The skyscrapers loomed like giants, their glass facades reflecting a world she'd only seen in pictures. Willow Creek, with its dusty roads and familiar faces, felt a lifetime away. She was here for a job, or so she thought, a housekeeping position that her cousin Travis had promised would pay $3,000 a month, enough to help her family, to maybe save enough for a better life. Her heart raced with nervous excitement, but a flicker of doubt lingered. Travis had always been slippery, his promises as fleeting as summer rain. Still, Sarah trusted him. She had no one else. The address Travis gave led her to a mansion on the Upper East Side, a fortress of stone and iron gates that seemed to swallow the sunlight. A butler greeted her, his face unreadable, and ushered her inside. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and old money. Sarah's worn sneakers squeaked on the marble floor, a stark contrast to the opulence around her. She expected to be shown to a kitchen or a servant's quarters, but instead the butler led her to an office where an older man sat behind a mahogany desk. Walter Dalton, James' grandfather, had eyes that gleamed with calculation. He slid a stack of papers toward her, his voice smooth as he explained she'd be working closely with his grandson. Sarah nodded, her fingers tracing the pen as she signed, believing this was her job contract. She didn't notice the word marriage buried in the fine print, or the way Walter's lips curled slightly as she handed the papers back. The truth hit like a cold wave. The butler took her to a grand bedroom, where a marriage certificate lay on a table, her name printed beside James Dalton's. Sarah's breath caught. She couldn't speak, but her hands flew in frantic signs, demanding answers. The butler, uncomfortable, explained that Travis had arranged everything, that the Daltons had paid him $500,000 to secure her as James's wife, a legal marriage, binding under New York law, signed by her own hand. Travis was gone, the money with him, and Sarah was alone in a city she didn't know, tied to a stranger, her chest tightened with betrayal. She'd trusted Travis, believed his lies about a job, and now she was trapped. She had no money to return to Willow Creek, no family to call. Her parents, distant and burdened, had long stopped caring. She was on her own. James Dalton was no warmer than the mansion's shadowed halls. Sarah met him in a dimly lit room, where he sat in a wheelchair, his face half hidden by the gloom. His eyes, once bright with ambition, were now sharp with bitterness. He was in his early 30s, handsome in a rugged way, but his scowl made Sarah shrink back. He didn't bother with introductions. "Who are you?" he snapped, his voice low and cutting. Sarah, unable to speak, gestured to the marriage certificate, her hands trembling. James's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "A gold digger," he muttered, "from some backwater town? You think you can scam my family? Get out." Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding. She wanted to explain, to tell him she was as much a victim as he was, but her silence was her cage. She shook her head, pointing to herself, then the door, signing that she had nowhere to go. James waved her off, turning his wheelchair away, dismissing her as if she were nothing. Sarah didn't leave. She couldn't. With no money and no way home, she stayed in the mansion, sleeping in a guest room that felt more like a cell. Walter, watching from the sidelines, told her she could earn her keep by working in the house, cleaning, cooking, assisting James. It wasn't the job she'd been promised, but it was something. Sarah threw herself into the work, her hands scrubbing floors, polishing silver, anything to keep her mind off the ache in her chest. She avoided James as much as possible, but his presence was inescapable. He was a storm cloud, his moods darkening the house. Yet Sarah noticed things about him, small details that pierced her defenses. The way his hands gripped the wheelchair, knuckles white with suppressed pain. The untouched trays of food left outside his door. The faint sound of restless tossing at night, as if sleep eluded him. He was hurting. And despite his cruelty, Sarah felt a pang of empathy. She knew what it was to feel alone. Her tasks soon included helping James with daily needs, a job no one else in the house dared to take. The first time she approached him, pushing his wheelchair to the dining room, he glared at her. "Don't touch me," he growled. Sarah stepped back, her hands raised in apology, but she didn't flinch. She returned the next day, and the day after, her quiet persistence wearing down his resistance. One morning, James spilled coffee on his shirt, his hands shaking with frustration. Sarah, without a word, fetched a cloth and gently dabbed at the stain. He froze, his eyes locked on her, but he didn't push her away. It was a small moment, fleeting, but it marked the first crack in his armor. Sarah began leaving notes for him, simple messages scrawled on scraps of paper. "Your lunch is in the kitchen." "The garden is nice today." James never responded, but she noticed the notes disappeared, tucked away somewhere he thought she wouldn't see. The fragile truce was tested by outsiders. Rachel Morgan and her sister Lauren burst into the mansion one afternoon, their voices sharp with accusation. Rachel, David Lawson's widow, was a woman consumed by grief, her eyes burning with a hatred that made Sarah's skin prickle. David was James's best friend, killed in the crash that left James wheelchair-bound. Rachel blamed James, believing he could have saved her husband. She stormed into his room, her words like knives. "You're alive, and David's dead," she spat. "You don't deserve this life." James sat silently, his face a mask, but Sarah saw his hands tremble. Lauren, younger and crueler, turned her venom on Sarah. "Look at this mute country girl," she sneered, circling Sarah like a predator. "What's she doing here, playing wife to a cripple?" Sarah's cheeks burned, but she stood her ground, her hands clenched at her side. Lauren's taunts grew vicious, mocking Sarah's silence, her cheap clothes, her very existence. She grabbed Sarah's arm, her nails digging in, and laughed when Sarah pulled away. "You're nothing," Lauren hissed. Sarah's eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Then, unexpectedly, James spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Leave her alone," he said. Lauren froze, her smirk faltering. Rachel shot him a glare, but James didn't back down. "Get out," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. The sisters left, but not before Rachel vowed to return, her words dripping with menace. Sarah looked at James, stunned. He avoided her gaze, turning his wheelchair toward the window, but the air between them had shifted. He'd defended her, a stranger, against women who'd haunted him for years. It was a spark, faint but undeniable, of something new. Sarah lay awake that night, her mind racing. She was trapped in a marriage she hadn't chosen, bound to a man who pushed her away, yet she couldn't ignore the flicker of connection between them. James was broken, like her, carrying wounds no one could see. She thought of Willow Creek, of the life she'd left behind, and wondered if she could find a way forward here. The mansion felt like a battlefield, with enemies like Rachel and Lauren lurking. But Sarah was no stranger to hardship. She'd survived her family's neglect, her town's whispers, her own silence. Maybe, just maybe, she could survive this too. And maybe, in doing so, she could reach the man who hid behind his pain, the man who, for one fleeting moment, had stood up for her. Sarah Bennett woke each morning in the Dalton mansion with a quiet resolve. The betrayal of her cousin Travis, who had tricked her into a marriage with James Dalton for $500,000, still stung, but she refused to let it define her. New York was a maze of noise and strangers, far from the familiar fields of Willow Creek, yet Sarah found strength in routine. She scrubbed floors, dusted chandeliers, and carried trays to James's room, her hands steady even when her heart wavered. She was trapped, legally bound to a man who barely acknowledged her, but she wouldn't crumble. She'd survived too much for that. And somewhere, beneath James's cold exterior, she sensed a flicker of humanity, a man drowning in pain, just as she was tethered by silence. James was a puzzle, his moods shifting like the city's unpredictable skies. Some days he ignored her, his wheelchair a barrier between them. Others he snapped, his words sharp enough to cut. "You're wasting your time," he'd mutter when she left a note or adjusted his blanket. But Sarah noticed changes, subtle as the first buds of spring. He stopped sending back his meals untouched. He lingered at the dining table when she served, his eyes flicking to her hands as they signed simple greetings. One evening, she caught him unfolding one of her notes, his fingers tracing her clumsy handwriting. "Get some rest," it read. He didn't smile, but he didn't crumple it either. It was progress, small but real, and Sarah clung to it. Her days weren't all quiet endurance. To repay the $500,000 she believed she owed the Daltons, Sarah took odd jobs outside the mansion. She handed out flyers on busy Manhattan corners, her mute condition drawing curious stares. She waitressed at a diner, balancing trays while dodging rude customers. The work was grueling, her earnings meager, but every dollar felt like a step toward freedom. She saved in a tin box under her bed, counting coins late at night, determined to clear her debt and decide her future on her own terms. The city was harsh, but Sarah was tougher, her rural roots giving her a grit that surprised even herself. James, meanwhile, was fighting battles of his own. His survivor syndrome, born from the car crash that killed his friend David Lawson, kept him chained to guilt. He replayed the accident endlessly, the screech of tires, David's final words. Therapy had failed him before, his stubbornness a wall no counselor could breach. But Sarah's presence, unyielding yet gentle, stirred something. One afternoon, she pushed his wheelchair to the mansion's garden, a place he hadn't visited in years. The air was crisp, scented with roses, and Sarah pointed to a bird flitting between branches, her face alight with wonder. James watched her, not the bird, and for a moment the weight on his chest eased. "Why do you care?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Sarah signed back, her hands deliberate. "Because you're human." He looked away, but the words lingered. Their bond grew in stolen moments. Sarah began teaching James basic sign language, her fingers guiding his to form words like thank you and sorry. He was a reluctant student, grumbling about wasted time, but he practiced when he thought she wasn't looking. One evening, after a long day, Sarah misjudged a step while helping him into bed, and they tumbled onto the mattress together. James froze, his face inches from hers, and Sarah's cheeks flushed as she scrambled up, signing apologies. He caught her wrist, his touch gentle. "It's fine," he said, a half-smile breaking through. Sarah's heart skipped, and for the first time she saw warmth in his eyes, a glimpse of the man he'd been before the crash. But the outside world wasn't kind. Rachel and Lauren Morgan, David's widow and sister, continued their crusade against James. Rachel's grief had twisted into obsession, her visits to the mansion laced with venom. Lauren was worse, her cruelty aimed at Sarah. One afternoon, while Sarah was cleaning the foyer, Lauren cornered her. "You think you belong here," she sneered, snatching a broom from Sarah's hands. "A mute nobody playing house with a broken man." Sarah's hands shook, but she stood tall, refusing to cower. Lauren shoved her, and Sarah stumbled, her shoulder hitting the wall. Before Lauren could strike again, James's voice cut through the air. "Enough," he roared, wheeling into the room. His eyes blazed, a fire Sarah hadn't seen before. "Get out, or I'll have you thrown out." Lauren scoffed but retreated, her glare promising trouble. Rachel, watching from the doorway, said nothing, but her silence was heavier than words. The incident shook Sarah, but it also changed something. James began seeking her out, his walls crumbling. He asked about her life in Willow Creek, her dreams, her fears. Sarah wrote her answers on a notepad, her words simple but honest. "I want to learn," she wrote, "to see the world beyond my town." James read it, his expression unreadable, then handed her a book from his shelf, a worn copy of a poetry collection. "Start here," he said. She smiled, clutching it like a treasure, and their evenings became a ritual, reading together in the quiet of his study. The debt still loomed, a shadow Sarah couldn't shake. She tracked down Travis at a seedy bar, her courage fueled by months of hard work. He lounged at a table, counting cash, his smirk fading when he saw her. "What do you want?" he said, tossing a crumpled bill at her feet. "The money you stole," Sarah signed, her eyes fierce. Travis laughed, pushing her back. "You're nothing without me," he said. Sarah fell, her palms scraping the floor, but she rose, undeterred. She didn't expect James to follow her, but he did, his wheelchair blocking Travis's exit. "You'll pay it back," James said, his voice calm but deadly. "Every cent." Travis paled, and within days James's lawyers recovered the $500,000. The funds returned to the Dalton estate. Sarah stared at the tin box under her bed, now obsolete, and felt a weight lift. She was free, or so she thought. Freedom brought new questions. Sarah could leave, return to Willow Creek, but the thought of leaving James ached. Their bond was fragile, unspoken, yet real. Then came a moment that changed everything. Lauren, emboldened by Rachel's silence, confronted Sarah in the mansion's kitchen. "You're a fraud," she hissed, grabbing Sarah's arm. "James doesn't need you." Sarah pulled free, her heart pounding, and Lauren lunged, her hand raised. "Stop!" Sarah shouted, her voice raw but clear, stunning them both. The word echoed, a miracle born of desperation. James, entering the room, froze, his eyes wide. "You spoke," he whispered. Sarah touched her throat, tears welling, and signed, "I did it for you." Lauren fled, but the moment belonged to Sarah and James, a breakthrough neither could ignore. The incident spurred action. James, inspired by Sarah's courage, agreed to therapy, meeting a counselor to confront his survivor syndrome. Sarah began speech therapy, her psychosomatic muteness unraveling as she faced her past trauma. Their recoveries were slow, tentative, but they leaned on each other. One night at a crowded bar where Sarah worked a shift, a drunk patron grabbed her, mocking her silence. James, there to pick her up, surged from his wheelchair, standing briefly to shove the man back. The bar fell silent, and Sarah rushed to his side as he collapsed, his legs unsteady. "You stood," she signed, her eyes shining. James gripped her hand, his voice hoarse. "For you," he said. The crowd watched, but they saw only each other. That night Sarah sat at her desk, her heart full. She wrote a note, her words trembling on the page. "I think I love you," it read. She slipped it under James's door, her pulse racing, and waited. Morning came, and James found her in the garden, his expression soft. He held a ring, a Dalton family heirloom, its gold warm in his palm. "I don't deserve you," he said, "but I want to try." Sarah took the ring, her hand steady, and signed, "We'll try together." They stood in the rose-scented air, two broken souls choosing each other, unaware of the storm Rachel Morgan was brewing, a storm that would test their newfound love to its limits. Sarah Bennett stood in the garden of the Dalton mansion, the heirloom ring on her finger catching the morning light. Her confession to James Dalton, scrawled in a trembling note, had been answered with a promise, a vow to try together. For the first time since arriving in New York, Sarah felt anchored, not by debt or duty, but by something fragile and real. James was changing, his survivor syndrome loosening its grip through therapy, his wheelchair less a prison and more a temporary state. Sarah's own voice, dormant since childhood trauma, was emerging in therapy, each word a small victory. They were two souls mending, their scars knitting together, but the world outside their quiet moments was not so kind. Rachel Morgan, driven by grief over her husband David Lawson's death, was a storm gathering strength, and her sister Lauren was her willing accomplice. Rachel's hatred had festered for years, rooted in the car crash that took David and left James alive. She blamed James, believing he could have saved her husband, though the truth was murkier, a split-second chaos no one could control. Therapy helped James see this, but Rachel was beyond reason. Her visits to the mansion grew erratic, her words sharper, her eyes wild with pain. Lauren fed her sister's obsession, her own jealousy of Sarah fueling her cruelty. They saw Sarah as an intruder, a mute country girl unworthy of James's affection. Sarah sensed their menace, but refused to hide. She'd faced her cousin Travis's betrayal, her town's whispers, her own silence. She could face the Morgans too, especially with James by her side. The storm broke on a chilly autumn evening. Sarah was at the diner, finishing a waitressing shift, her apron stained with coffee. James had promised to pick her up, a small gesture that warmed her heart. As she wiped down tables, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the old warehouse on 10th Street, it read. "We need to talk about James." It was signed Rachel. Sarah's stomach twisted. She knew Rachel's anger, had felt it in every barbed word, but the message hinted at urgency, a chance to end the feud. Against her better judgment, Sarah typed a reply, agreeing to meet after her shift. She didn't tell James, not wanting to worry him. It was a mistake she'd soon regret. The warehouse was a crumbling relic, its windows shattered, the air thick with dust and decay. Sarah stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the dark. Rachel stood in the center, her face pale, her hands clutching a small handgun. Sarah froze, her breath catching. She signed. "What do you want?" But Rachel's laugh was bitter. "Don't play innocent," she said. "You and James think you can live happily while David rots?" Sarah shook her head, her hands pleading. "It's not his fault," she signed. But Rachel wasn't listening. She stepped closer, the gun unsteady in her grip. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "I'll make him feel my pain." Sarah's heart pounded, but she stood her ground, her eyes locked on Rachel's. She thought of James, his rare smiles, the way his hand felt in hers. She wouldn't let Rachel destroy him. Before she could act, footsteps echoed and James appeared, his wheelchair creaking on the uneven floor. "Rachel," he called, his voice calm but firm. "Let her go. This is between us." Rachel turned, her gun wavering between them. "You don't get to choose," she said, her voice breaking. "You lived, and David didn't. Now you'll lose what you love." Sarah's chest tightened. She signed to James, "Go," but he shook his head, his eyes never leaving hers. Rachel's plan unraveled into chaos. She ordered Sarah to leave, but when Sarah refused, Rachel's anger erupted. She shoved Sarah toward the warehouse exit, where a car waited outside, its engine running. Lauren sat in the driver's seat, her face grim. "Get in," Rachel snapped. But Sarah resisted, her hands grabbing at the doorframe. James surged forward, his wheelchair tipping as he tried to reach her. Rachel screamed, firing a wild shot that grazed the wall. The sound jolted Lauren, who panicked and hit the gas. The car lurched forward, straight toward James, who had fallen from his chair onto the pavement. Sarah's world slowed, her fear a living thing. She broke free, running to James, pushing him out of the car's path, just as it swerved, crashing into a stack of crates. The impact echoed, wood splintering, metal groaning. Sarah knelt beside James, her hands checking for injuries. He was conscious, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, but alive. Rachel stumbled from the wreckage, her gun lost, her face a mask of shock. Lauren, unharmed, fled the scene, leaving her sister behind. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled out her phone, her fingers fumbling to open the text to 911 app she'd installed after therapy. "Help," she typed, her words clumsy but clear. "Warehouse on 10th Street, man hurt, gunshot." She hit send, her breath ragged, and held James's hand, signing, "Stay with me." He squeezed back, his voice weak. "I'm not going anywhere." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Police and paramedics swarmed the warehouse, their lights painting the walls red and blue. Rachel sat against a crate, her defiance gone, tears streaming as officers cuffed her. James was lifted onto a stretcher, his eyes locked on Sarah as he was wheeled away. She followed, her heart in her throat, the weight of what had happened crashing down. At the hospital, doctors rushed James into surgery, his injuries severe but not fatal, a concussion, broken ribs, and a deep gash on his leg, they said. He'd need time, but he'd survive. Sarah sat in the waiting room, her clothes stained with dust and blood, her mind replaying the crash. She'd almost lost him, and the thought carved a hollow in her chest. Caleb Dalton, James's cousin, arrived, his usual bravado softened by worry. He sat beside Sarah, his hand on her shoulder. "You saved him," he said. "How did you call for help?" Sarah showed him the text to 911 message, her fingers still trembling. Caleb shook his head, amazed. "You're tougher than you look," he said. She managed a small smile, but her thoughts were with James. Hours later, a nurse approached, her face kind. "He's stable," she said. "You can see him soon." Sarah nodded, relief flooding her, but another revelation came moments later. A routine check had revealed something unexpected. "Miss Bennett," the nurse said, "you're pregnant." Sarah's hand flew to her stomach, tears welling. A child, hers and James's, a new life born from their fragile love. Walter Dalton arrived, his presence commanding despite his age. He'd been alerted by Caleb and wasted no time. "Rachel's been arrested," he said, his voice grim. "Attempted murder, kidnapping, reckless endangerment. She won't see daylight for a long time." Sarah nodded, but her focus was elsewhere. "What about Lauren?" she signed. Walter's jaw tightened. "She turned herself in," he said. "Couldn't handle the guilt. The police are building a case." Sarah exhaled, the Morgans' threat fading, but her heart stayed with James. She thought of their child, a future they hadn't planned, and felt a fierce determination to protect it. When Sarah entered James's room, he was awake, his face pale but his eyes bright. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, but he reached for her hand, his grip weak but sure. "You spoke again," he said, his voice hoarse. "In the warehouse I heard you." Sarah shook her head, signing, "I don't know how. It just happened." She hesitated, then wrote on a notepad, "I'm pregnant." James's eyes widened, a smile breaking through his pain. "A kid," he whispered. "We're going to be parents." Sarah nodded, tears falling, and leaned against him, careful of his bandages. They sat in silence, the weight of the night lifting, replaced by a shared hope. The hospital room became a sanctuary, a place where their love solidified. Caleb and Walter took charge outside, ensuring the Morgans faced justice. Rachel's trial loomed, her actions a tragic end to her grief. Lauren, complicit but less driven, faced lesser charges, her future uncertain. Sarah and James focused inward, their bond unbreakable. The pregnancy news spread, and Walter, gruff but moved, promised to support them. "Your family now," he told Sarah, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. She signed, "Thank you," and meant it, her heart full despite the chaos. As James recovered, Sarah felt their child's presence, a quiet promise of tomorrow. The warehouse had tested them, nearly torn them apart, but they'd emerged stronger. Rachel's hatred had failed to break them, and Lauren's cruelty had crumbled under its own weight. Sarah looked at James, his hand in hers, and knew they'd face whatever came next together. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Now, with a new life growing inside her, Sarah felt ready to build a future, one where love, not pain, would write the story. The hospital room faded into memory, its sterile walls replaced by the warm glow of a new life. Sarah Bennett and James Dalton had faced the storm of Rachel Morgan's hatred, emerging not just alive but stronger, their love a beacon through the chaos. James's surgery had been a success, his broken ribs and gashed leg healing under the careful hands of doctors. Therapy, both physical and emotional, became his daily ritual, each step a testament to his will to reclaim his life. Sarah, pregnant with their child, stood by him, her own voice growing steadier through speech therapy. The Dalton mansion, once a place of shadows, now hummed with hope, its halls filled with plans for a future neither had dared to dream. James's recovery was a journey, not a miracle. Months of rehabilitation rebuilt his strength, his wheelchair set aside as he learned to walk again. The crash that had taken his mobility years ago, compounded by survivor syndrome, had been a mental as much as a physical cage. With Sarah's quiet encouragement, he broke free. One spring morning he took his first unassisted steps across the mansion's garden, Sarah's hand in his, their laughter mingling with the scent of blooming roses. She signed, "You did it," her eyes shining, and James pulled her close, his voice steady. "We did it," he said. Their child, still a gentle presence within Sarah, seemed to share the moment, a silent promise of the family they were building. Sarah's dreams, once confined to Willow Creek's narrow horizons, found new wings. James, determined to support her as she'd supported him, enrolled her in a community college in New York. She chose literature, her love for books sparked by the poetry collection James had given her. Classes were daunting, her muteness a challenge in discussions, but Sarah thrived, her notepad filled with ideas, her voice emerging in soft, careful words. Professors praised her insight, classmates admired her resilience, and James, attending her first reading recital, beamed with pride. She stood at the podium, her hands signing as she spoke, a poem about love and healing that left the room silent with awe. Sarah was no longer the mute girl from a small town. She was a woman carving her own path, with James by her side. Their home became a sanctuary, a modest apartment near the college, traded for the mansion's grandeur. Walter Dalton, gruff but generous, gifted them the space, his way of blessing their new start. Caleb, James's cousin, helped them move, his jokes about diaper duties lightening the load. The apartment was small, its walls adorned with Sarah's sketches and James's old travel photos, a blend of their pasts and hopes. At night, they lay together, Sarah's hand on her growing belly, James whispering names for their child. They chose Hope, a name that carried the weight of their journey, a reminder of what they'd overcome. James returned to his company, not as the brash CEO of his youth, but as a leader tempered by pain and love. His colleagues welcomed him, their respect earned through his quiet determination. He worked long hours, but always came home to Sarah, their evenings filled with stories of her classes or his meetings. The survivor syndrome that had once defined him was a shadow now, kept at bay by therapy and Sarah's unwavering presence. He still dreamed of David Lawson, but the nightmares were fewer, replaced by visions of Hope's future, of teaching her to walk, to laugh, to love. The Morgans' shadow faded. Rachel's trial ended with a long sentence, her grief a tragedy that consumed her. Lauren, remorseful, accepted a plea deal, her punishment lighter but her life forever changed. Walter ensured the Dalton name carried weight in the courts, but Sarah and James focused on healing, not revenge. They forgave, not for the Morgans, but for themselves, letting go of the past to embrace their future. Willow Creek, too, became a distant memory for Sarah. Her family, indifferent to her absence, sent no letters, but she found family in James, Walter, Caleb, and the child she carried. Hope arrived on a crisp autumn day, her cries filling the hospital room with joy. Sarah held her daughter, her voice soft as she whispered her name, tears mingling with James's as he kissed them both. They were a family, forged in hardship, bound by love. Flashbacks of their journey played in Sarah's mind. The cold mansion where they met, the garden where they laughed, the warehouse where they nearly lost each other. Each moment had led to this, a new beginning that felt like a miracle, though it was built on their own strength. Their story wasn't perfect. There were days when James's legs ached, when Sarah's voice faltered, when the weight of their pasts pressed close. But they faced them together, their love a steady flame. They took Hope to the park, her tiny hands reaching for the sky, and dreamed of her future, of college, of adventures, of a life free from the pain they'd known. Sarah wrote poetry for her, James planned trips they'd take, and together they built a home where love was the foundation. Love is not about finding someone perfect, but about embracing each other's scars to create a beautiful future. Sarah and James learned this, their journey a testament to the power of connection, of choosing each other despite the odds. Their story reminds us that love can heal, not by erasing pain, but by sharing it, by building something new from the pieces. What's your story of love? Share it in the comments below. Let us know how someone changed your life. Subscribe and hit the bell to join us for more tales of heartache and hope, stories that prove love is the greatest adventure of all.